The galaxy feared the beast, but only one human knew its gentle beginning. The scrapyard moons of Thalos were not places anyone visited willingly, they were the graveyards of forgotten wars. Broken dynasties and technologies too dangerous to recycle but too precious to discard. Scavengers risk their lives combing through the twisted hulks of fallen cruisers and shattered dreadnoughts, hoping to find something still breathing power or something rare enough to make the risk worth it. Kane Harrow didn't call himself a scavenger, he was a mechanic, the last one who hadn't gone mad or fled Thalos 7, the hottest and most volatile of the moons where even machines seemed to sweat. He worked alone out of an old plasma freighter he'd refit into a workshop, hammering rusted dreams back into function, welding hope together out of bent metal and memory. The only thing he feared more than being forgotten was being needed, and Thalos made sure he was both. It was during one of his routine core hunts through a derelict Imperial courier vessel half buried in sulfur ash and scarred from atmospheric re-entry that he heard the growl, not the kind of growl you hear from an engine under strain or from a melted grav joint about to rupture. This was lower wet animal breathing came. Froze in place half inside a crawl shaft between two blown power couplings holding a plasma blade still humming with blue light. At first he thought it was just his own fatigue, a hallucination. But then he heard it again, closer and sharper. He followed it down deeper into the bowels of the ship where the air was thicker and every step crunched over broken glass and torn plating. Past the bodies of Imperial guards slumped in their seats with helmets half melted into their skulls through a security door jammed halfway open, sealed with blood and soot, and there it was at the end of a corridor lined with scorched insulation and flickering panels, nestled between two supply crates and the burnt remains of what looked like a golden feeding bowl was a cage half shattered, still sparking. The restraint field sputtered, dying impulses. The creature inside wasn't moving. Kane approached slowly. He knew what he was looking at, even if every part of his brain told him it was impossible. A tiger cub or something that once had been, but no normal cub had midnight black stripes glowing like magma beneath its fur. No natural beast had eyes that shimmered in molten gold, even in the low light of dying electronics. Its breathing was ragged, its paws each tipped with glass-like claws were coated in ash. The creature's ribs showed through its sides. And yet when Kane stepped closer, it lifted its head and growled. It wasn't threatening, not fully. There was no strength left in it, but the sound wasn't asking for help either. It was warning him, don't touch me, I don't belong to you. Kane knelt down, careful to let the plasma blade dim to avoid alarming it. The glow of the dying field lit the creature's face, and he saw then that one of the cub's fangs was cracked, blood dried at the corner of its mouth. Its back leg was bent wrong. The collar around its neck still bore a flickering sigil, a stylized flame inside a crescent. The mark of Empress Fra. He cursed under his breath. This wasn't just some predator, this was property, high blood property, the kind you didn't rescue, the kind you turned in for credits and walked away from before someone decided to put a knife in your back to claim your prize. And yet the cub looked at him, not with fear, not with pleading, but with defiance. You're not going to last another hour out here, Kane muttered. You know that you, the cub said nothing. Kane stepped forward and pulled off his thermal jacket. The cub flinched, its growl deepened for a moment, but when he wrapped the jacket around its body and lifted it carefully into his arms, it didn't resist, it just trembled. A low sound, smaller than a growl, more like a whimper, escaped its throat. Kane didn't look back as he carried the beast out of the wreckage, climbing the ridge toward his crawler. The sky above was bruised red from the heat storms, the twin suns sinking behind the bone-sharp mountains of Thalos. He climbed into the cockpit with the cub curled against his chest, threw the engine into reverse, and floored it across the glass flats. The entire way home, he felt its heart beating against his ribs, fast, hot like a fusion core waiting to ignite. By the time they reached the workshop, the creature had stopped growling. Kane laid it on the thermal pad beside his workbench, cleared away the tools, and started cleaning the wounds. He hadn't named anything in a long time, but when he saw the shimmer of heat still dancing beneath her fur as if her bones were burning from the inside out, he spoke without thinking. Pyrrha, the cub's ear twitched, and that was enough. The first night was rough. Pyro whimpered in her sleep, clawed at the walls, and bit into the metal paneling until her gums bled. Kane didn't sleep. He sat nearby, half building a coolant stabilizer with one hand while the other held an old injector full of Bjorth serum. He didn't use it until the morning after she let him place a hand on her back. For the first time, her muscles were coiled like tension wires. Her tail twitched like a flame refusing to go out. She didn't purr. She never purred, but she stayed over. The next few days, her wounds healed, her cracked fang mended. She began to explore the garage. Every inch she batted open crates and knocked over his salvage drone pile. She tore a strip out of his cot, ate 4 of his ration bars, and spat out the protein paste with a hiss that made Kane laugh harder than he had in years. He tried to treat her like a normal animal at first, but she wasn't. Her eyes tracked his hand movements when he rebuilt engine parts. She followed the blinking lights of the console when he took inventory. When a power cell overloaded and blew sparks across the room, she didn't flinch. She watched the fire with interest, as if it spoke her language. It wasn't long before Kane noticed the change in her gait. She didn't move like a cub, she moved like a predator. Waiting, her legs had strengthened rapidly. Her paws were nearly the size of his forearms. Her shoulders rippled with coiling muscle, and the glow beneath her stripes had become constant, subtle, but ever-present. Something was stirring in her that Kane couldn't name, and still she never left. One night, as he leaned over a power terminal sketching out a new heat condenser, he felt warm breath on his shoulder. Pyrrha, she rested her head beside him, her body curled silently beneath the desk, eyes closed. She hadn't led in days, hadn't whimpered either. He reached over and scratched gently behind her ear. She tensed, then leaned into it. Just a little. You're not a tool, he said softly, not a trophy either. Whatever she made you for, you're not it anymore. The overhead lights buzzed once. Wind howled outside the shutters. Pyrrha didn't answer, but when he stood and turned off the lights, heading to his cot, she followed, not beside him, not behind. With him, and for the first time in his years on Thalos, Kane Harrow didn't feel alone, not in the dark, not even in the silence. Pyrrha's growth was unnatural. By the second cycle of Thalos's triple moon, she was nearly twice the size of when Kane had found her. Her shoulder rose to his waist, now her musculature visibly shifting beneath a thick coat of black-orange fur that shimmered faintly like coals in low light. The glow beneath her stripes no longer pulsed gently, it moved with her breathing, with her steps, with her will. Kane wasn't a scientist. He didn't understand gene templating or hybrid class bioweaving, but he did know machines, engines, things that hummed with barely contained power. And Pyro was an engine not born but forged, made to survive, to dominate, to burn. Yet she listened. That was the part that haunted him most. Every morning when he opened the workshop gates, Pyrrha was already awake, sitting atop the roof, her massive tail swaying idly over the edge, eyes locked to the horizon as if watching something only she could hear. She'd leap down in a single bound and follow Kane as he moved through his morning routine, gathering parts, checking for scavenger threats, patching up what the last storm had ripped open. She never demanded food, never whined, never begged. She simply waited for him to speak first, then she would act. He taught her boundaries, not through commands but gestures. His outstretched palm meant pause, a clenched fist back off, a sharp whistle meant hide. It wasn't training, it was understanding. Pyrrha learned faster than anything he'd ever seen, not just tricks but intention. The first time he caught her reading the blinking symbols on his console. He froze. She was seated beside the plasma core diagnostics panel, watching the color-coded warning alerts shift between red, orange, and green. When the coolant unit failed, the light blinked yellow. Pyro pressed her paw against the corresponding console only once and then looked at Kane. She knew when she leapt across the scrap pile that afternoon and dragged back a half-buried auxiliary core module with her jaws. He didn't even blink. He started to understand slowly that he wasn't raising a pet, he was waking something that had never had the chance to be alive before. It was also that same week the scavengers came, 2 ships painted black, with no identifiers, no transmissions, no docking permission. They landed in the crater valley near the workshop and powered down their engines like predators lying in wait. Kane watched from his crow's nest optics at maximum zoom. The figures who stepped out were not scavengers. They wore ash-gray armor and moved like shadows, efficient, controlled, professional Imperial bloodhounds trained to retrieve to silence. Pyrrha saw them too. He tried to keep her back, to gesture her away, but she wouldn't move, not out of defiance, out of knowledge. She knew what they were, knew them better than he did. Her fur bristled, her body lowered into a crouch. Her breath hissed between her teeth like steam through cracked metal. Kane activated the first line of defenses. Automated turrets disguised as fuel tanks. The guns roared, the assassins scattered, but Pyrrha moved faster than bullets. She tore through the workshop gate like it was cloth, launching herself down the slope in a blur of orange fire and roaring teeth. Kane barely had time to follow her with his scope. The first soldier didn't even scream, just disappeared beneath her claws. The second fired a charge net. It wrapped around her flank for 3 seconds, then the net caught fire and Pyrrha kept moving. Kane watched as she hunted them through the scrap field, not wildly, with precision, not a berserker, a tactician. She knew where they would run, where they'd hide, what noise their boots made on metal versus sand. She didn't fight like a beast, she fought like she remembered being hunted. When it was over, she returned limping, fur scorched where the net had stuck. Kane rushed to her, hands bloody from reloading his traps, eyes wide with panic. She collapsed beside him, breathing hard. He knelt. Pyrrha, she raised her head, nuzzled his arm. He ran his hand through her ash-slicked fur. You saved me. Her tail twitched once, then she slept. He spent the night cleaning her wounds, wrapping gauze where her plating had cracked and reinforcing the workshop walls. The bloodhounds wouldn't be the last, but now he knew Pyrrha wasn't something the Empress had made to look beautiful in a cage. She was a blade she had lost control of, and now Kane was the only one who knew how to hold it without bleeding. The first broadcast came 4 days later. Kane was reassembling the backup core rotator when every screen in the garage, every audio line, and even the workshop sensors suddenly flickered to life. It wasn't a hack, it was a command override. Only one entity had that level of reach. The Empress of Dravis. Her image appeared in full holographic display, rendered across the upper scaffolding and shimmering red-gold light. She sat on a throne of obsidian coils, hands gloved in crystal weave, face hidden behind the ceremonial veil of state. She did not speak immediately. She waited, then her voice, silken and calm, filled the air. To the man sheltering my weapon, I know who you are. Ken Harrow, former Imperial engineer, exiled from the core for disobedience. You once rebuilt a planetary shield grid with nothing but a blowtorch and hope. You are clever. The lights flickered. Pyrrha stood beside the console, ears flat, her teeth bared in a silent growl. I had nearly forgotten the creature you now cradle. The Empress continued. Pyro was not meant to survive the purge. She was unstable, unruly, beautiful but flawed. I had her disposed of during transport. It seems the waste process failed. Kane clenched his jaw. Pyrrha growled louder. You've given her something she was never designed to possess, the Empress said. Choice? Kane stepped forward. She's not yours anymore. The Empress didn't even flinch. Everything I build is mine. Mr. Harrow, including your death should I command it. He stared into the projection's flickering veil, then come. Claim it, the Empress tilted her head, you'll find I do not make threats only. Endings, and with that the broadcast cut, the screens went dark. Kane turned to Pyrrha, heart pounding, she looked at him. And for the first time since he'd pulled her from the wreckage, her eyes didn't burn with fear or rage, they burned with resolve. Kane looked down at his hands, shaking with adrenaline, then clenched them. We're not running, he whispered. Pyrrha stepped closer and pressed her head into his chest, gently, not as a creature seeking comfort, but as a warrior preparing for war. The days after the Empress's broadcast changed everything. Ships circled, those not warships yet, but scouts, cloaked drones, silent cruisers. Parked in the shadow of the Argel, and Kane watched them every night from the crow's nest, eating half-warm protein bars with one hand and gripping his rusted plasma carbine in the other. Some of the ships bore no colors at all, some had the faint insignia of core intelligence units. All of them waited, they weren't here to kill. They were waiting for him to surrender her, but Pyrrha didn't hide. Each morning she stalked the outer yard with confidence. She made herself seen standing atop the wreck of the fallen fusion barge, her stripes glowing like a solar flare beneath the dawn sky. Her body moved like molten steel in motion, every muscle taut, her eyes locked on the ships above as if daring them to blink. She wasn't being reckless, she was sending a message. Kane watched her and wondered if he should have been afraid. What he had raised wasn't a pet, wasn't even a companion. Pyrrha had become something else entirely, and yet when she came to rest her head against his thigh after patrol, when she licked the oil off his hand while he worked, when she curled around his bedroll at night like a living flame wrapped in protection, he didn't see a beast, he saw the only thing in the galaxy that had never asked him to be anyone other than himself. It wasn't until the attack came that he realized how far she had truly come. They dropped in fast, 6 armored troopers in sky black armor, landing pods camouflaged by a pre-storm radiation burst. They didn't speak, they didn't demand, they struck. One pod crashed through the garage wall. Kane was tossed across the floor as sparks and debris flew. He scrambled for his weapon but was tackled to the ground by a soldier with a net cannon. The air smelled of ozone and chemicals. His ribs screamed. He shouted for Pyrrha, and then the lights turned red. He didn't see her enter, he only saw the aftershock. One moment the soldier him had a blade to his throat, the next he was a smear across the workshop, while the others tried to surround her. Net traps, sonic grenades, fire dampeners, none of it mattered. Pyrrha moved like a living meteor, every motion a line of fire, every breath a weapon. She crushed their legs before they could react. She melted their visors with breath so hot it liquefied glass. She flung 2 of them through the air like dolls, snapping spines before they hit the floor. But it was the sound she made that shook Kane. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar, it was a name, not in words but in something deeper, deeper than code, deeper than memory, a cry that echoed from her chest like thunder, shaking the ground, breaking the air, ripping through the walls. Pyrrha, the name burned itself into the wreckage like a vow. When the last soldier dropped twitching, she limped toward Kane, smoke trailing from her jaws. Her shoulder was bleeding, her flank smoked from a close-range suppressor burst. Kane crawled to her and wrapped his arms around her neck. You shouldn't have done that alone, he whispered. She huffed against his chest, then collapsed. He worked all night to save her, sewed the wound with thread made for starship seams, replaced her coolant glands with pressure regulators pulled from a downed glider. He didn't sleep, he didn't eat, he whispered to her even when she couldn't hear him. You're not going back to her, you're mine. We're ours. When dawn broke over the scrap plane, Pyrrha stirred, and for the first time Kane saw something behind her golden eyes that had never been there before. Pride. The next transmission wasn't a warning, it was a declaration. The Empress's voice crackled through every planetary frequency, her words sharp and venom-laced. Kane Harrow You have stolen imperial property, you have raised it in rebellion, you have turned a sovereign weapon against the hand that created it. This is no longer retrieval, this is judgment, then silence. Followed by Scifi, a fleet descended, small but devastating, 3 destroyer class vessels, 2 atmospheric interceptors, and a flagship painted in the Empress's own colors, crimson and ghost white. Kane saw them from the roof, standing beside Pyrrha, who had already begun to growl. "They're not taking you," he said. Pyrrha's tail thrashed. He had planned for this, months of preparation. Every inch of the yard wired with traps, energy coils buried beneath the dirt, pulse rigs mounted on wrecked turrets that hadn't seen battle in years but still drank power. Kane hadn't built a fortress, he built a fuse. As the first dropships launched from the destroyers, the scrapyard ignited, walls exploded outward into shrapnel, turrets sprang from crates and cargo haulers, magnetic mines detonated midair, but none of it compared to Pyrrha. She didn't wait for them to reach the ground, she leapt into the sky. Kane had never seen her fly, not in the way she did now. Her claws caught the edge of a descending ship, tore through the wing chassis, and vaulted her into the next. Her body burned with kinetic fire, every movement fueled by the very storm that filled her veins. She landed on the nose of the flagship with a roar that split the clouds. The Empress herself appeared on the upper deck, draped in red steel, surrounded by gold-armored sentinels. She raised her hand. The sentinels aimed. Kane's heart stopped. Then Pyrrha did something no one expected. She stopped moving. She stood there, tall and terrible, breathing smoke, eyes locked with the Empress from across the deck. And she waited. The Empress lowered her hand slowly. "Still you obey instinct," she said, her voice carried by a projection drone. "Do you understand what you are?" Pyrrha answered by leaping directly at her. The screen cut. Kane lost her in the smoke. He didn't know how long the battle lasted, only that when the flagship limped back into orbit, flames trailing behind it and 3 destroyers burning in its wake, Pyro returned to the scrapyard. She was limping, but she was smiling, not with her mouth, with her eyes. Not the acidic mist that hissed off metal, not the sulfur steam that rose from cracked vents, real rain, cold, clean, soft enough to touch the ruins of the scrapyard like a benediction. The fires were out, the craters were cooling. The warships that had once patrolled the skies above were now wrecks fused into the earth, their spines curling into broken silhouettes against the horizon. Kane stood in the open doorway of his rebuilt workshop, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the figure curled in the ashes. Pyrrha, she had not moved in hours. She rested the center of the blast zone, her breath slow, eyes closed, her body still radiating heat from the last stand. Her side was scarred where the Empress's blade had sliced into her plating. The strike had missed her heart, but not by much. No one had ever landed a blow like that, no one else ever would. Kane walked out into the rain and sat beside her. "You fought like hell," he said softly. "I thought I'd lost you." Her ear twitched. He rested a hand against her side, feeling the pulse of warmth beneath her ribs. She was healing slowly. Her kind had never been meant to live long, only to serve short, violent lives in the Empress's wars. Burn bright, burn fast, and be replaced. But Pyrrha refused to fade. Kane leaned back, closing his eyes against the rain. He didn't speak for a long time, neither did she. Finally he whispered, "I don't know what happens now." Pyrrha stirred, lifted her head, and turned to look at him. Her eyes no longer glowed like fire, they glowed like purpose. She rose to her feet, powerful and slow, and stepped away from the crater. Her paws sank into the wet soil, steam curling off her shoulders. She looked toward the mountains, not as an animal watching for danger, as a queen surveying her land. Kane followed her gaze. Out there, past the charred horizon and slagged ridges, lay the remnants of the Empress's frontier, small colonies, supply routes, hidden labs holding pens where others like Pyrrha had been created, most of them destroyed, others buried and forgotten. But if there was even a chance, if even one had survived, "She wants you to be the last," Kane murmured. Pyrrha looked at him and growled low in her throat. No, she would not be the last, she would be the first. The forge had been built from blood, from fear, from control, but now it would burn again, not to craft chains, but to melt them. Cain stood and wiped the rain from his brow. Then we bring the fire to her doorstep. He walked back into the garage, pulling open the hatch to the deepest storage bay beneath the layers of scrap and salvaged gear. An old assault skiff sat dormant, armored, half-forgotten. Cain had built it years ago and sealed it away, waiting for a reason. Now it had one. Pyrrha climbed the platform behind him, her wounds still glowed, but she moved without pain as she stepped into the launch bay. The ground shook. She looked at the ship, then it came. They were going back, but not to hide, to hunt. They came in from the black side of Dravis Core, drifting past the shattered moons where old colonies once wept under imperial law. The skiff, named Ember One, was cloaked in thermic shielding, invisible to radar. Cain handled the helm. Pyrrha watched from the gun hatch, eyes burning as the system's main star painted their hull in crimson. Light ahead lay the Empress's stronghold, not the palace she ruled from, but the birthplace of her weapons, the breeding vault, a fortress carved into the spine of an iron moon hidden behind solar storms and protected by a magnetic curtain. No one got in, no one got out until now. Cain disengaged the cloak and accelerated straight into the storm. Lightning crackled across the nose of the ship. Plasma bursts rocked the wings. Pyrrha roared once, no fear, no warning, just fury. The shield activated late. They crashed through its outer rim like a comet. Inside the vault rose like a mountain of steel and red light. Surrounded by cannon towers and drone nests, sirens screamed, guards swarmed. Cain leapt from the cockpit, rifle slung across his back. Pyrrha didn't wait, she hit the ground, running her body, a storm of glowing stripes and razored claws. She cut through the first gate like it was paper, tore the sentinels like they were ghosts. Cain followed behind her trail to hat, disabling defenses, cracking control panels, planting charges. Every floor they cleared, he saw the signs: labs, cages, feeding trough systems designed not for life but control. He saw the broken bones of those who had been born like Pyrrha but never escaped. She saw them too. She paused at every cage and growled until they reached the core. The Empress was waiting. She stood beneath a cathedral of cold machinery, draped in living armor, eyes rimmed with dark fire. Behind her, dozens of prototype creatures growled. Within, containment tanks, unfinished, unloved. She raised a hand. You will not unmake me. Pyrrha stepped forward. Cain reached for his weapon, but Pyrrha stopped him. She walked alone across the chamber. The ground shook under her steps. She stared into the face of her creator, not with rage, not with hate, with clarity. The Empress snarled, "You were never meant to be free." Pyrrha roared and the tanks exploded. The young ones poured out like sparks from a forge, crying, limping, snarling, but they came to her, not the